Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this very timely and important hearing on human rights in Cuba. We are here to examine the state of human rights, which is a very timely topic indeed, given the Obama administration's sea change in policy towards Cuba announced at the end of last year. We are here to ask whether, in undertaking this change in policy, the Obama administration used the considerable leverage that it wields to seek to better the condition of the Cuban people, or whether, as I fear, as an opportunity that was squandered in its haste to achieve a diplomatic breakthrough and even create a legacy for the president. Thus, this hearing is not only about Castro regime accountability, but also the Obama administration's accountability, with Congress exercising its role of both oversight and as a bully pulpit for reminding the world that Cuba remains a communist dictatorship which continues to arrest political dissidents, and I would underscore an estimated 178 political dissidents in the last month alone, and one whose caudillo, Raul Castro, has declared would not change even in response to the Obama administration's concessions. This Castro regime continues to harbor fugitives from justice, such as Joanne Chesimard, who was convicted in the 1973 murder of a state trooper in my own home state of New Jersey. Officer Werner Forrester was gunned down gangland style after she escaped from prison. Indeed, just yesterday, we had the Assistant Secretary for State for the Western Hemisphere, Roberta Jacobson, appear before the full Committee of Foreign Affairs. I asked her what the response of the Cuban government was when she raised the issue of the return of Joanne Chesimard to justice. She replied that the Cuban government stated that it was, quote, not interested in discussing her return, close quote. That is absolutely unacceptable. I have in my hands a statement which I asked to be submitted for the record from Christopher Burgos, the president of the State Troopers Fraternal Organization in New Jersey, wherein he states on behalf of our Jersey State Troopers that, quote, we are shocked and very disappointed that returning a convicted killer of a state trooper was not already demanded and accomplished in the context of the steps announced by the White House regarding this despotic dictatorship. I would also point out that, as an aside, that both President Burgos and New Jersey State Police Superintendent Colonel Rick Fuentes both very much wanted to be here, and we will have another hearing to hear from them, and I look forward to that follow-up hearing. But unfortunately, we do have with us, fortunately, and it is a tremendous honor and a privilege to have with us today, three extraordinarily brave and uniquely qualified witnesses to the brutality of the Cuban dictatorship. Three human rights activists who, at great personal cost to themselves and their families, have and continue to stand up for human dignity. We will hear about the deplorable state of human rights in Cuba. Just read the State Department report on human rights, as well as other reporting that has been done by other NGOs. And it couldn't be more clear that human rights are violated with impunity by the Castro brothers and their regime. I would note parenthetically that years ago, during the Reagan administration, I met with Armando Valladares, who spent almost 2 decades in the Cuban Gulag system. And I'll never forget when I went and read his book. He actually led a delegation to the United Nations UN Commission. Matter of fact, Ileana and her staff, we went time and time again to that commission, asking them to look at the deplorable state of human rights in Cuba. When I was with Armando Valladares, that I was in awe of his courage as well. He was able to get the UN to look at, pass a resolution condemning the deplorable situation in Cuba, and to deploy a team to go to the prisons and investigate these terrible abuses of human rights. There were promises made by Fidel Castro that there would be no retaliation whatsoever against those who spoke in prison and the family members who came forward and friends to bear witness to a terrible truth instead of truths. Everybody was retaliated against. The people in the prisons, as well as their families. And regrettably, the UN was unable, perhaps unwilling, but certainly unable to do anything to mitigate it or to stop that retaliation. I have pushed for years to go to Cuba. I've been denied a visa for 2 decades or so. I want to go to the prisons Of course, I'll meet with Fidel if I am able to lead a delegation or even go on my own with my staff. We can't get that visa. Both Frank Wolf and I tried a number of times, and it got so bad that at one point Fidel Castro said that we were provocateurs. I want to go meet with the dissidents. Frank Wolf and I got into prisons in the Soviet Union, the infamous Perm Camp 35, where people like Natan Sharansky suffered and were tortured by that communist dictatorship. When Xanana Guzmão, who became the president of East Timor, I went and saw him when he was in Jakarta and went to prisons all over the world. But we can't get into Cuba. We even got into Beijing prison number 2, where 40 Tiananmen Square activists were being forced to do gulag labor. Head shaved, gaunt, looked like concentration camp victims. And yet, Mr. Wolf and I, could not and I can't get into those prisons. So I will be asking the government again, have already asked, and I've asked our government to help facilitate it, to go to the prisons. And even on the ICRC yesterday, the Red Cross, I asked Secretary Jacobson, and I said, much has been made that the ICRC might be able to get into the country. That's unacceptable. Get into the prisons. And again, there has to be absolutely no retaliation to those who speak out. I would point out that after testifying here today in public, and I thank C-SPAN especially and the journalists for taking this story and making Americans aware of what is actually happening in Cuba right now as we meet. They will be returning to Cuba. And this committee, and I know the entire Congress will be watching to ensure that their safety and well-being and health is not further jeopardized. But the courage to come forward to a congressional hearings. Our friends over on the Senate side receive compelling testimony as well, and to bear witness to an ugly truth of torture. I would ask everyone to go back and reread Against All Hope, Armando Valladares' famous book. He talked about tortures that I don't even want to mention in public. They are so despicable, of putting dissidents in vats of excrement, so bad that it went into their ears and nose and they got infections. Armando Valladares told me that when he and his wife, when they finally got to the United States and got asylum, that when he couldn't even change his children's diapers because the smell of excrement brought back instantaneously, like PTSD, remembrances of that kind of degrading and cruelty imposed upon them. The Castro brothers and many in this regime ought to be at The Hague for crimes against humanity. That's how bad it is. These are among the worst abusers of human rights in the entire world. So again, I want to welcome our brave and courageous witnesses. I want to thank Ileana Ross-Layton and Mario Diaz-Balart. Ileana has been such a leader for so long in raising the truth of what is going on in this Gulag island. I have much more to say, but I will put the rest of it into the record. But I do want to thank our witnesses again, and I look forward to hearing their testimony.